The sun has hung in the same place for as long as I can remember, a frozen orb in a sky that no longer moves. It used to rise, used to set, used to signal time and rhythm, hope and rest. Now it just stares, unblinking. Day never ends. Shadows are fixed in place like scars burned into the earth. The air hums with heat. Nothing grows anymore, not really. The last trees turned brittle years ago, their roots boiled, their leaves crisped to ash. You can taste the world's exhaustion. Every breath feels like breathing through sand. The wind used to carry the smell of rain. Now it drags the ghosts of deserts across what used to be cities. The rivers are gone, carved dry veins in the crust, winding like memory through lands that forgot how to be alive. I used to know this place by name, by skyline, by light. But names don't mean much when everything's melted into the same shade of ruin. The skyline is a mirage. Towers lean like bones of giants, blackened glass dripping in the heat. Streets buckle, shimmer, and crack open to reveal the hollow guts of a civilization that thought it was immortal. Asphalt melts in soft waves. Cars sink into it, their metal frames half submerged, half fused. Every reflective surface burns your eyes if you look too long. We used to call this the northern plains. There used to be wheat, fields that moved like oceans under the wind. Now the land is a dull mirror of itself, cracked clay and dust stretching so far it's hard to tell where the horizon ends and the sky begins. If you walk too long, the light bends around you. The heat plays tricks. Sometimes I swear I see trees again, water again, but mirages are crueler than emptiness. The temperature sits steady around 140 degrees by the old measures, if you can find a working thermometer. The survivors stopped counting. Numbers don't matter when the difference between too hot and dead is a breath. Civilization dissolved not with a bang, but with thirst. The governments fell when the water rationing started, first laws, then riots, then silence. Some cities burned themselves down, others just faded. Those with power hoarded what was left in underground vaults and high towers. Those without, well, most didn't last long enough to become stories. What's left now are fragments, little camps tucked under what shade they can build. Nomad convoys dragging their wheels through the sand, and scavengers picking through what's left of our old gods. Steel, oil, and concrete. There are whispers about places where the air still moves and the ground still holds moisture. But whispers are dangerous. They make you believe again. The last institution I ever heard from was a relay out of Denver. They tried to keep the weather stations running to study the flux to predict the solar stagnation. But one by one, their broadcasts thinned, their voices cracked, and then they vanished into static. Now the airwaves are just ghosts. Static whispers, the occasional faint echo of a signal no one remembers how to send. I broadcast because silence feels like surrender. Somewhere out there, someone might still be listening. Maybe they'll hear my voice and know they're not alone. Maybe they'll turn the dial and catch a fragment of this old frequency, the one we used to use for music, and hear something that reminds them we were here once, we mattered once. But survival now is simple math. You stay in the shade if you can find any. You travel at what used to be night, though night never comes, only the dull red gloom when the sun lowers just enough to make the heat bearable. You scavenge batteries, filter dust, scrape moisture from condenser plates. Every drop is a victory, every breath a rebellion. I've seen towns swallowed whole by dunes, highways buried, signs half visible under layers of heat-warped dust. The old symbols exit, welcome, rest, stop, look like memorials to a time when movement meant something more than survival. Even the birds are gone. The last I saw was a vulture, its feathers falling out mid-flight, drifting down like black snow. Insects died first, then the crops, then the people who depended on both. Now it's just us, the stubborn ones, the ones too guilty or too hopeful to lie down and stop. If you listen closely, and I mean really listen, you can still hear the world breathe. Not like it used to, but like a dying ember trying to hold on. The heat hums, the dust sighs, the silence feels alive. And somewhere beyond the horizon, I like to believe there's still a place where the sun moves, even if it's just a dream I tell myself to stay human. Because if the sun ever sets again, maybe, just maybe, we'll get to see the stars. My name doesn't matter much anymore. Out here, names are just stories you tell yourself to remember you were once somebody. But since you're listening, or I hope you are, you can call me Reed. I used to have a last name, a job, a schedule, and a mortgage. I used to plan weekends, not ration them. But the world doesn't care about who you used to be. It only asks one question now: how long can you keep going? I've been asking myself that every day for years. The short answer is, I survive because I have to. The long answer is, complicated. I wasn't always a voice in the static. Before all this, before the sun froze in place, before the sky turned into a kiln, I was a weather technician. I worked at a regional broadcast station just outside the city, reading temperature models, tracking wind patterns, predicting rainfall that never came. We were supposed to be the ones who sounded the alarms early enough to make a difference. We thought we could measure the end before it arrived. But you can't outsmart inevitability. When the atmosphere stalled and the planet's axis shifted, we didn't even have a word for it. The sun just stopped moving. At first, people thought it was a glitch, an orbital anomaly, some kind of optical illusion. Then the days stretched longer and hotter. Then they stopped, and the heat started stripping the world, one layer at a time. I stayed behind when the station evacuated. My team scattered, some joined the government convoys, others fled north in search of cooler ground. I told them I'd catch up, but I didn't. I couldn't. Someone had to stay on the air, at least for a while longer. Maybe it was pride, maybe guilt, maybe just the need to do something while everything burned. Now, the station is my world. It's a squat concrete bunker with walls thick enough to keep the worst of the heat out, though the metal still warps when the midday sun is overhead. The roof caved in years ago, so I built a makeshift shield from scavenged solar panels and reflective scrap. The panels feed the transmitter, and the transmitter feeds my voice into the emptiness. It's a cycle. Sunlight becomes signal, signal becomes hope. That irony isn't lost on me. I spend most of my days keeping things alive, the generator, the radio tower, myself. I scavenge what I can from the ghost city nearby. Batteries, filters, old cans of food. Sometimes I find relics, children's shoes, broken mugs, faded photographs. I don't take those. They're graves, not supplies. My water comes from a condenser rig I built out of old AC units and a tarp of solar fabric. It pulls what little moisture is left in the air and drips it into jars. I remember when a glass of water was nothing. Now, each drop is worth more than gold ever was. At night, or what passes for night, when the sun dips just enough to bleed the horizon red, I sit by the transmitter and talk. That's my ritual. It keeps me sane. I report what I see, what I remember, what I wish I didn't. I read old weather logs, tell stories about cities that used to shine, about oceans that used to breathe. I pretend someone's out there, tuning in, scribbling notes, nodding along. Sometimes I even get a signal back, static mostly. Once a faint voice, couldn't tell if it was male or female, young or old. It said 3 words before the line cut, still here, listening. I replayed that message for weeks, still do. It's saved in my recorder, a relic of proof that I'm not entirely alone. That's what keeps me going. The idea of someone else out there. The possibility that humanity isn't finished yet, but hope's a double-edged thing. It keeps you alive, but it hurts too. I lost everything else a long time ago. My wife, Elara, she was a botanist, stubborn and brilliant. She believed the world could adapt. Even when the ground cracked open and crops turned to ash, she'd go out there with her gloves and samples, whispering to dead plants like they might wake up. We stayed together until the day the last green faded. Then she left, said she heard rumors of a northern research colony where they were growing life underground. I wanted to go, but the station needed me. Or maybe I just needed the station. I told her I'd keep broadcasting so she'd always have a voice to find. She never came back. I don't know if she made it. Sometimes, when the static flares just right, I almost hear her name in the noise. I tell myself it's just feedback, but part of me still listens, still waits. And then there's the boy. Not mine by blood, just a kid who showed up one day, half starved, eyes wide like he'd seen the end and survived it. He called himself Finn. Said he was heading north, too, following stories of a river that hadn't dried up yet. He stayed for a week, helped fix the antenna, traded a few cans of beans, told me stories about scavenger bands and heat cults worshipping the sun. When he left, he gave me a small, hand-carved compass. Doesn't point anywhere anymore, but I keep it by the console. Proof that there are still hands that can make something in this world. Sometimes I think about going north too, but I don't, because if I leave, this voice dies, this signal dies. And maybe somewhere out there, someone is waiting for it like Alara once was, like Finn might be. So I stay, I speak, I endure. The worst part of this endless day isn't the heat, it's the stillness. The world used to have rhythm: sunrise, sunset, the pulse of time. Now the clock hands spin, but the light never changes. You lose track of days, seasons blur, sleep becomes optional. I measure time in broadcasts, in repairs, in the fading color of the sky. Sometimes I dream of rain. The sound of it, the feel of it, that cool percussion on rooftops. I think I remember the smell, though memory lies as much as hope does. In the old world, I used to study the weather. Now I talk to it. Sometimes I beg it to move again. I don't expect an answer. But silence has its own language, and if you listen close enough, it almost feels like it's listening back. I don't know what I am anymore, broadcaster, witness, ghost. But I know this. As long as the transmitter hums, I'll keep talking. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to say it out loud that we were here, that we fought, that we cared. The world may have burned, but our voices don't have to. So if you're still out there, keep tuning in. I'll be here. I'll keep the frequency open, just in case you find your way back to me, to this place, to whatever's left of the world. You're listening to the radio as the sun refuses to set. And as long as I can still speak, the story isn't over. The crisis started small, the way all disasters do, a whisper of anomaly in someone else's data set, a model that didn't quite match the map. Then the whisper turned into an argument, the argument into a series of emergency memos, and the memos into trucks leaving the city with sirens on. Nobody expected the sky to stop moving. Nobody had a plan for a sun that refuses to set. At first, it was a failing orbit, then an atmospheric collapse, then talk in hushed voices about the planet's tilt and the jet stream folding like a page. Scientists called it stagnation, a locking of the daily thermal cycle. Whatever you name it, the result was the same. One pressure system decided it owned the hemisphere and refused to leave. The clouds stopped forming the way we trusted them to. The moist air stopped rising, and the slow, patient mechanics that shuffled heat away at night fell asleep. Daylight didn't just stretch, it froze. You can learn the mechanics if you want the cold facts. Heat pumps stopped pumping. The convective currents that carried moisture from sea to land weakened until ocean and soil stopped sharing water. The albedo shifted because ice and snow disappeared, reflecting less sunlight, absorbing more. The more heat the ground soaked up, the more it radiated back, and the more the atmosphere amplified that radiation. Feedback loops became accusation loops. The planet's thermostat broke, and we were left standing under a sky that never cooled. But you don't live by graphs. You live by the way heat peels the paint off a door frame, by how quickly canned food softens, by the way metal becomes fragile and brittle like old bone. You live by the dust that refuses to settle because the ground is too hot to hold it. That's the crisis I wake up to. Every morning, if it can be called morning, the world is closer to a tipping point than it was the day before. Survival is harder each day because scarcity compounds scarcity. Water is the root of it. Where once the regional reservoirs held enough to trickle the towns, now there are empty basins and salt-slick beds. Wells that used to draw 10 feet of groundwater now spit dust. Wells deepen into forgotten aquifers and find nothing but heat. Food chains collapsed when crops failed and pollinators went mute. Fuel is less of a lifeline now and more of an argument. To run the last diesel rig a community needs, or to save the fuel for scavenging trips that might never pay off. Batteries die and cannot be replaced. Electronics that helped us band together become useless relics without stable power. People changed with the resources. Some bands hardened into raiders, not always out of cruelty, but out of pure arithmetic. If you don't take, you don't eat. Others became hermits, guarding the smallest comforts like gold. Still others tried to rebuild civility, barter rings, mutual aid watches, schools by flashlight. The moral map tore apart and redrew itself on every road. I've met them all. There's Mara's caravan, a string of rusted pickups with tarped roofs, people who trade batteries and storytelling for water. Mara is tough in the way old trees are tough. She bends but doesn't break. She runs supply runs into the old suburbs, trading with small enclaves that still cling to rooftop gardens gleaned from hydroponic manuals printed before the collapse. Their success is fragile, dependent on shaded greenhouses built from scavenged glass and polyethylene. I keep their signal in my head like a hymn. They exist, therefore hope still roots somewhere. Then there are the Sunwarders, a cult born from heat and myth. They worship the permanence of light, interpret the endless day as a revelation rather than a punishment. They light pyres at planned intervals and mark births under the unblinking sun. The Sunwarders aren't all violent, but they believe resources are divine gifts to be consumed by the faithful. I've had to dodge them twice. Once they raided a water cache outside my bunker. They left footprints like punctuation marks, sharp, quick, final. The worst are the organized raider packs who call themselves the Reclaimers. They travel with maps of what used to be a grotesque cartography of targets, labeled by the weight of what they expect to carry away. They are efficient. They have radios and scavenged night vision goggles, a mockery of the concept, and enough cruelty to make you forget you ever thought people were basically good. You don't win against them with force unless you have numbers, and numbers are a luxury few can afford. You win by being smaller than a map, moving in the heat like a memory, quiet and deliberate. Severe weather still arrives, but it's not the weather we used to fear. We fear the thermal storms, walls of shimmering air that move with the speed of an animal. They are not wind in the old sense. They are shock fronts of heat carrying microfires and glass-like grit that cuts skin and corrodes lungs. These thermal rolls can snuff out a camp within minutes, turning tents into tinder and generators into melted metal. Then there are the flash ignitions. When the dust-laden air meets a pocket of superheated oxygen, it flares in yellow fingers across the landscape. We learn to watch the sky for the wrong colors. A white blush at the horizon is not sunrise. It's a danger signal. Toxic fogs sometimes settle, a chemical consequence of burning cities and melting industrial caches. When factories collapsed, vats and canisters broke and mixed into the wind. A layer of oily haze stretches across lowlands in the mornings. You can taste it like pennies. Masks help, but nothing filters everything. Respiratory infections crept back through the population, helped by heat-stressed immune systems. Those without medicine patched the sick with saline and hope. Hope is not always enough. Resources, they're a ledger of loss. Water, ration filtered, hoarded. Food, canned, dehydrated, bartered. Protein replaced by scavenged insects and the occasional solar-baked goat. Fuel, a dwindling currency used for longer hauls or to power critical pumps. Power, the grid died, and microgrids took over small arrays of solar, ironic. I know feeding batteries and inverters cobbled together from salvage. But solar is a double-edged sword. It gives us energy and also tells everyone exactly where light, and therefore life, still clings. Batteries fail in the heat. Inverters overheat and trip. The best power systems are those kept in shaded, ventilated places with rotating loads and obsessive maintenance. I learned that the hard way. We also lack information. Maps are outdated. Weather models no longer behave predictably. The libraries of knowledge that once guided policies have been reduced to the memory of people like me, technicians and teachers who remember how things connected. That's why the radio matters. Not because I'm special, but because the broadcast is a thread, a fragile tether to knowing whether someone else still breathes beyond the dunes. Without it, communities fragment into rumor, and rumor becomes violence. The practical limitations I face are specific, mundane, and exhausting. My condenser rig produces a liter of water every 3 days if the air is kind. 3 days is a long time when 3 people are drinking from the same jar. Food lasts in jars. Protein is rationed down to the marrow. I can't keep the transmitter at full power all the time. The panels overheat if I push them, and batteries fail if I drain them dry. So I schedule. Broadcast high during the red dusk when people are likely to move, low during the heat peak. I have to scavenge capacitors and diode arrays to keep the transmitter tuned. A single corroded connector can send the whole station into silence. Silence is the worst thing. Silence is like erasing footprints you've left for someone else. There's a science to movement now. You don't travel in straight lines. You travel in shadows. You move when the heat folds, the thin hours when the sun dips and the air feels only slightly less lethal. You carry water close to the body, wrapped in cloth to keep it cooler longer. You rig reflective shields to cover engines. Metal overheats and warps, and a malfunction in the middle of a bad road is a sentence. You travel light because weight kills when you can't cool down. Any extra load is a burden on the body's ability to regulate temperature. That's practical knowledge and also human cruelty. You learn whose lives you can carry and whose you can't. I also teach radio etiquette now. If you're broadcasting and not concise, you burn precious wattage. If you call out coordinates without a code, you might as well put a target on your head. We developed shorthand protocols, 3 brief pings to request supply exchange, 2 long notes to warn of incoming raiders. Code is trust here. Trust is thin as skin. I learned to verify voices, a cadence, a cough, a phrase repeated in a familiar way. Finn's compass sidles next to my mic as a charm against liars. There are moments of strategy that feel illegal in another life, but are survival here. You fake a route to throw trackers off your scent. You bury caches and mark them with symbols only you remember. You plant decoy signals to draw raiders away from real caches. None of this feels noble. It feels necessary. We are not criminals in the moral sense. We are accountants of desperation. We subtract what we must to avoid being wiped from the ledger of the living. The crisis is also psychological. Endless day frays the mind. Sleep disorders circle like vultures. Children born under the unending light age without a sense of night. They learn patterns by routine, not by sun. That alone shapes the next generation into something new. Tougher skin, thinner patience, different myths. People forget the old calendar. They forget songs that reference moonlit nights. Memory erodes into superstition, and superstition can be weaponized. That's another limit. To remember honestly is to be constantly raw with grief. To forget is to survive a little easier. Still, pockets of ingenuity persist. A community in the old subway complex has implemented rain catchment condensers using cold night air forced through deep shafts, a trick that works only near rivers or in shaded strata. There are underground growers coaxing fungi and hardy succulents under LED lights powered by hand cranks. These inventions don't fix the world, but they buy time. Time is everything. Right now, the immediate threat is a compound one. The reclaimers have marked a string of fuel depots for their next sweep. A thermal storm is predicted. By the old models, I can still coax into something useful, and my condenser is showing signs of failure. A cracked heat exchanger I can't patch without scavenging. I'm scheduling a run at the edge of what's acceptable. The dawn-dusk window, a convoy of 2, the shortest path. I broadcast the run as raw data, location, time, water need, not to solicit help but to test the air for replies. If someone answers, I'll reroute. If not, I go anyway. That's the life of crisis. making hard choices with worse odds. You balance compassion against pragmatism. You choose who to trust and when to flee. You repair radios while heat gnaws at metal and friends fall ill from the poisons the old world left behind. You keep a ledger of the living and the dead in your mind and whisper their names into the microphone so they don't disappear from memory entirely. The sun refuses to set and the world refuses to be simple. The crisis is not a single event. It is a series of collapses layered onto each other: ecological, social, mechanical, psychological. My job is to name them aloud because naming is resistance. Saying the problem out loud refuses the silence the heat would force upon us. It is a small, stubborn defiance. I will keep declaring the world as it is, because in the declaration there is the chance someone hears it and answers. So I will keep speaking the coordinates, the cautions, the sonnets of survival, the condenser's cadence, Mara's caravan's grit, the reclaimer's hunger, the sunwarder's pyres. I will tell you where the danger is, because the most dangerous thing we can suffer now is to be alone and unannounced in a world that punishes solitude with heat. The heat has a way of sharpening everything. It takes the soft edges off choices until they cut clean. When your days are measured in the number of times a condenser fills a jar, when your nights are simply the hours you dare to walk, decisions stop being abstract. They are immediate and cruel. Take the risk and maybe find water, or stay and ration down until the ration runs out. Leave the safety of the bunker to scavenge a broken inverter, or keep the transmitter alive, and let the last battery fade into silence. Things have gotten worse. The condenser's cracked exchanger leaked yesterday. It's a slow betrayal, a hairline fracture that splutters the drip rate from a liter every 3 days to a liter every 5. I can jury-rig a fix with copper tubing and epoxy if I can find the right sealant. The sealant lives somewhere in the ruins between the station and the old university lab. That's a day's run through heat-trapped streets and the edges where the reclaimers like to hunt. It's also a necessary run. 5 days per liter and 2 mouths at the bunker equals ration arithmetic that ends badly. So I planned the run. I planned it like a surgeon plans a cut, careful, precise, cold. I mapped shadows, timed the mirrors of light on the sidewalk, made a route that threaded through alleyways where old awnings still gave a teasing shade. Mara offered a scout in exchange for spare capacitors. Finn promised to ride with me for moral ballast and for the pace of a younger pair of legs. I broadcast the time window to the usual frequency, low power so as not to draw raider ears, and I encoded the rendezvous in the shorthand we'd grown used to. Then I packed the bag, a cold water bottle wrapped in cloth, a shoulder ration of reconstituted beans, a spare diode bank, and the compass Finn gave me. You learn to be suspicious of gifts. You learn to read a gesture the same way you read static on the dial. Finn's knot in the rope of our small social web is loose sometimes, but his eyes had that look, the one people get when hope blossoms into a plan. It's dangerous to believe in plans. Plans make targets. Plans make promises you cannot keep. On the road, the city felt like a carcass in heat. The asphalt whispered and popped. Streetlights had long since become skeletons. I moved like a shadow myself, a man trying to be less visible than the glare. We'd gone 2 blocks when the first sign that something was wrong taped itself to the air. Scavenged sashes caught on a chain-link fence, strips of cloth that had once been used to mark territory now fluttering like warnings. The smell came next, not the natural smell of rot, but the metallic tang of burned copper. Someone had been here recently. We found a smoldering cache on the corner where the old pharmacy used to be. A dozen batteries lay ruptured, their casings popped like rotten fruit. Around them were footprints, heavy and numerous. The reclaimers had been through, not long before us. They always take the things people need most: water, filters, fuel. They leave the small cruelties, a snapped radio antenna, a carved R into the doorframe to show they were here and to remind people of their hand. Mara's face on the radio when I reported the find was a thin strip of ice. "They're getting bolder," she said. "They're cutting the supply lines." Bolder. That's the polite way of saying they're desperate enough to kill for the last cans. When people say desperation breeds cruelty, don't imagine fevered lunatics at the edge of civility. Picture accountants with guns who have done their math and concluded that a life of quiet thievery is worth the risk of a firefight. They have schedules and tactics, and they don't flinch. We continued, careful and light, trying to step where the heat pooled less. Finn's pant leg caught on a shard of plastic, and he cursed softly, a sound that, in the wrong ears, becomes a beacon. He's young enough to feel immortal sometimes, and old enough to know the lists of things that break people. I barked at him to keep quiet. He nodded and folded himself down like a boy who'd learned to become invisible. I heard him breathing, too loud in my ear, full of the small tremor that comes from pushing through fear. We reached the university lab at the fringe of noon, the worst time, and the building shadowed us like a ruined promise. I could see through the broken doorway the shapes of machines frozen in the way of abandoned lives. Lab benches with beakers crusted in salt, an old compressor unit with one blade still ticking. The sealant was in a labeled box. I almost laughed at the relief that small gesture brought me. It was absurd to feel victory over glue, but glue is what holds us together now. We loaded the sealant and were stepping out when the sky gave us a sound. It's hard to describe, a kind of low, rolling disharmony, like a distant furnace starting up. Then the air shuddered and the world seemed denser. The thermal front hit like someone pulled a curtain across the city. It pushed like a hand and the heat rose in a terrible wave. I felt my skin tighten. Finn's face reddened and he started coughing. The world blurred at the edges. You could see the air bending like water. We ran. Running in heat is its own punishment. Your lungs do not want to cooperate. Each inhale feels like drawing through a straw packed with sand. I lost sight of the lab doorway and only heard the scrape of fists on metal, the crack of a dropped tool. We made it to the alley and threw ourselves into the cool shade behind a collapsed awning. Finn's cough had turned sharp. He tasted ash. I fumbled in my pack for saline, for cloth, for anything to help clear his throat. While we waited for the thermal wave to pass, a shadow fell over us in a way that made my skin crawl. Figures moved like smoke on the edge of the light, sunwarders, their silhouettes marked with strips of reflective fabric. They were not the pyre worshippers I'd avoided in the outskirts. These were scavengers who'd learned to use the sun's glare as camouflage. They stepped slow, quiet. They had a ritualized manner that made me think of hunters praying by fire. One of them spoke in a voice smoothed by the long burn of sun cult sermons. "We trade," he said. "Water for knowledge. Water for knowledge. It's the kind of barter that sounds clean in a broadcast but smells like a trap in the alley." I played cautious. Mara's voice crackled low in my ear, keeping the radio off so as not to give our position. Finn swallowed and kept one hand on the sealant like it was a newborn. The sunwarders edged closer, offering a bottle wrapped in cloth that smelled faintly of iodine. "No tricks," the man said. "We seek maps. We seek places that still move." Maps are currency. They are hope and they are bait. I thought about Alara and her maps of plant genetics, about the way she used to fold a map and trace roots as if they were veins. I almost believed the man because I wanted to. The bottle changed hands because Finn reached out too quickly, because in youth impatience often breaks the delicate skeleton of caution. The bottle was full enough to make our mouths sing. Finn drank. He breathed in deep and smiled like a boy who'd been given back the moon. That's when one of them stepped forward and raised a hand to the sky, a sign I recognized too late. The thermal wave had moved on, but the reclaimers were already in our periphery, like fish circling a wounded gull. The sunwarders were bait and reclaimers were the hook. They weren't working together. They were opportunists in a chain. The sunwarders used the thermals to obscure movement. The reclaimers used abuse to take advantage. We were in the crosshairs. Bullets cracked the alley like small thunder. Finn's smile died and he went down by a wall, clutching his shoulder. The bottle shattered and water hissed on hot concrete like a terrible laugh. I remember the sound of the transmitter in my head, the voice I'd used to sound the alarm, the words that mean help. But help doesn't come on cue. The frequency hummed quietly in my pack as a useless lullaby. I should have run. I should have dropped everything and run. But the desert teaches you priorities. You run with what matters most and leave the rest. I left the sealant and the spare diodes, grabbed Finn, and dragged him into the shadow of a rusted van. Blood on his sleeve steamed in the heat. He was heavy and hot and fighting sleep. I could feel the awful arithmetic of the wound. Shallow cut, arterial, or a shallow but painful bruise that would rot later. I didn't know. I only knew he was breathing, and that the reclaimers were combing the street like scavengers with maps. We made it back to the bunker in a crawl that felt like an exodus. The heat ate at us. The station's door slammed shut with a finality that felt obscene. A little private world sealed against the outside. Finn's wound was a messenger of everything that had been wrong with the day. I cleaned it with boiled water and saline, wrapped it as best I could, and watched his chest rise and fall with the exhaustion of someone who'd costed too much for a drink. The reclaimers took the lab's inverter and left a marker on the wall, a black X with 3 lines through it. They'd been bold enough to mark their path, a claim that says, "We were here, and we will be back." Mara's voice over the relay was thin with anger and fear. "They're mapping us," she said. "If they figure our caches, there's nowhere to run." This is the pattern of the rising action. Resources get thinner, violence gets smarter, hope becomes bait. Then the other part arrives, the rumor. Rumors are wild things. They're half lies, half pleas, and they spread faster than water. The latest is called the Fold. It's a whispered legend of a valley a day's drive north where the sun does something it hasn't done in years. It dips enough to give a proper night. Some call it a trick of the topography, others a secret engineered by scientists who hold up in the mountains. Mara swears someone in her caravan saw a photograph, a real photograph, damp with condensation, showing a line of trees under a dark sky. Finn believes it. I want to believe it. But faith without verification is the kind of thing that gets people killed. Truth is thinner than rumor. The Fold could be a shard of memory or a functioning eco-sanctuary with moving air and water. It could be a reclaimer trap. The idea of night is valuable enough to pull a city into a net. Or it could be real, and the people whispering it are the last honest beacons in a world full of false lighthouses. The problem is the same with every rumor. You must choose whether to risk your station, your people, your voice on the chance it's true. My internal struggle becomes a chorus. Stay to keep the broadcast alive, or leave one more time and hope to bring back a miracle. If I go, who keeps the frequency? If I stay, who cleans Finn's wound when it turns festering? If I trust Mara's caravan as an ally, do I risk them becoming a target of the reclaimers? What is the moral calculus when compassion could cost lives? At night again, what we call night, when the sun lowers to an angle that softens the heat but never abandons the sky, I replay the day on air. I tell the listeners what happened in careful tones. The lab, the sealant, the ambush, the rumor of the Fold. I don't dramatize. I don't embellish. I read coordinates in code and I send out pings asking if anyone has corroboration. The line stays quiet for hours, static. Once a voice like gravel answered, "North Valley, old reservoir, not alone." Then silence, a broken piece of hope. That single sentence does what rumors do best. It splits the world. Finn wakes with fever and talks in his sleep about blue water. Mara reroutes her caravan and promises to scout ahead. The Sunwarders circle the edges more boldly. The reclaimers revise their maps. My station becomes a pivot. People answer, not because they trust me, but because they need information. They need to know whether to flee, to stay, to follow a rumor that could save them or kill them. Tension thickens like sediment in a storm. The world pushes back with small, violent increments. Supplies dwindle. Alliances restart like fragile machines. and the rumor of the fold becomes a magnet that might either gather us or scatter us. The rising action is not a single crescendo, but a series of choices that tighten a rope around the throat of the last normalcy. I can feel the cord pulling. I have to decide soon whether to keep the radio on this frequency like a lighthouse, or whether to climb into a convoy and chase a shadow that might, in the end, be the last real place to call home. So I keep talking. I keep the mic warm with the small human noise of my voice, because sometimes the loudest thing you can do in a dying world is describe it plainly. If the fold is real, I will be accused of failing by not leaving sooner. If the fold is a lie, I will be told I wasted what we had chasing ghosts. Either way, I am tired of being sure of nothing. Either way, I have to choose. And choosing means we are still alive enough to be accountable. That is, perhaps, the smallest mercy left. The day the world tried to take everything at once, it did it with a sound that felt like the earth clearing its throat. The thermal storm rolled in sooner than any of my patched models predicted, faster, angrier, riding on a pressure wall that sounded like distant machinery. Mara's last message on the relay had been clipped but full of urgency. Fold possible, reclaimers converging, move now, then static, then nothing. I had a decision to make that no person should have to make in a world that still pretended to be human. Stay with the transmitter or leave with the convoy. The condenser was failing. Finn's wound had turned darker at the edges, and the sealant that might have bought me sanity and water lay lost beyond a city painted with footprints. Mara's caravan had the route and the numbers. They also had capacity for 3 more bodies. If I left with them, I could try to find the fold, perhaps bring back a source of night and water. If I stayed, the signal would remain the only thread between scattered survivors, but at the cost of never knowing whether the fold was real. Ilara's voice, memory, not sound, whispered through me like a tide. She would have packed every last seed and map, then gone. She would have sworn she'd be back with soil under her nails and a plan. I loved her for that, but love didn't fix infrastructure. Love didn't solder a broken exchanger. Love didn't stop bullets. I did what I always did when choices were knives. I tried to make them surgical. I split tasks. Mara would take Finn and 2 others and move north to the coordinates we'd gleaned from the crackled relay logs. She would run a low-power beacon once they crossed the ridge so I could triangulate. I would stay to finish the condenser jury rig with the remaining parts I'd scavenged in previous trips, keep the transmitter alive as long as possible, and then attempt a short relay to meet them if the beacon blinked green. It sounded like compromise. It sounded like logic. It sounded like leaving a door open. They left at dusk, meaning the slimmest angle the sun allowed, when the heat folded enough to be bearable. Finn insisted on coming even though I argued. He was stubborn in the way only the young can afford to be. He packed water with a grin and kept touching the compass like a talisman. Mara stayed long enough to clasp my wrist, the kind of grip that transfers weight and expectation, and said, "If the fold's true, we'll call. If not, come when you can. Don't die for a microphone." I laughed then, because what else do you say? She left wheels and dust and the sound of human voices trailing off like a prayer. After they left, the bunker tasted like abandonment. I pushed the generator into a higher gear, opened the chassis, and started the work on the condenser. The sealant I'd hoped to find in the lab was gone. The fracture was brittle and finicky. I taped copper over copper and wrapped fiberglass sleeves the way my hands remembered. My fingers smelled like burnt metal. The transmitter hummed on standby, patient and fragile. Then the sky did something I'd only ever seen in nightmares. The sun bent. Not the slow dip that gave us that slice of mercy each day, but a contortion that painted the horizon in wrong colors, a white flare like an eye opening. The thermal front hit with the velocity of a falling wall. The lights on the console stuttered. The air pressure in my ears popped. Dust moved in slow, viscous sheets. The world became a kettle of boiling glass. I should have shut down, should have found the deepest shelter in the bunker and clung to breath. But the radio was still a thread someone might follow. I flipped the mic and spoke into the static because talking is the one human thing I can still give freely. "This is Reed on Channel 1, I said, my throat raw from the heat. "Thermal wave inbound. Wind vectors shifting east-west at 30 knots. Seek shelter in sealed enclosures. If you're moving north with Mara, pick a valley with shaded ingress and wait for my ping." No reply. Only the white hiss of weather and a thin, hungry silence. The storm's first punch slashed the outer panels off the roof like a hand tearing paper. Heat slammed into the room the way a fist hits a door. Hard, bone-deep, immediate. My ears rang. The console flickered, and one of the solar panels curled and peeled like a banana skin. Then someone screamed from outside. I ran because instinct is a better judge than thought in those moments. Finn's voice, thin, ragged, half cough, half yell, came from the stairwell. I found him in the entry, half collapsed against the bulkhead, blood dark on his tee, eyes glassy. He'd been patching up a shallow rip in his sleeve, trying to pull his shirt into some makeshift dressing. A shard of glass had nicked a vein while he'd been fumbling with a battery. The heat had accelerated everything. His heart was erratic. He looked up and tried to smile. "We can't go like this," he croaked. "No," I said, and for a second the world narrowed to the space between us. "We'll do this right." I bandaged him, wrapped ice packs made of condensed water jars, and set him on the cot. The storm made the bunker hum. I could hear Mara's convoy, distant like a phantom, calling in faint pings through the static. I keyed the mic and sent a coded ping, 2 long, 1 short, a status query. A voice answered, broken and thin. "Beacon green. Valley moving shadows. Hold the line." Relief is a dangerous thing in a boiling world. It softens your edges. I poured it into the condenser, pushed the rig, rerouted power to the coolant, coaxed a last angry drip to fall into the jar. The seal held for now. The transmitter coughed but stayed alive. The beacon, Mara's promise, blinked faint and green on my handheld receiver. They were there. They were telling me they'd found something. A fold, a valley, a night. Hope surged like a fever. My hands moved quicker, balancing circuits and radio gain. I began to prepare a short-range relay. If Mara's beacon held and their words could be verified, I would reduce the transmitter's signature and try for a fast sprint to meet them at the valley edge. But the world had other plans. The reclaimers hit our perimeter with the methodical cruelty of people who had mapped every weakness. They didn't need to bash a door down. Heat does the rough work for them. I heard their boots on the scorched gravel, the hiss of a flare, the dull pop of gunfire against metal. They wanted the transmitter, not only for supplies, but for leverage. A living broadcast is a bargaining chip worth more than canned meat. Mara's voice crackled over the handheld then. "Reclaimers on the ridge. We'll buy you time. Move when the wave eases." Her signal was a single breath and a promise. I could hear gears grinding in the static, their convoy moving to intercept and misdirect. They were making a stand. I had 2 options. Keep the transmitter and broadcast for help at the risk of drawing reclaimers into coordinated assault, or shut it down, save myself and Finn, and run blind into a valley that might be a trap. My palms sweated against the mic. The condenser's jar filled another half-inch. The beacon's LED blinked like a heartbeat. Finn moaned in his sleep. I thought of Alara tending seedlings under lamplight, tracing veins on a map. I thought of Mara's hand on my wrist. I thought of the kid with the worn compass that no longer pointed true, but always pointed hopeward anyway. The mathematics of survival had shifted to something resembling a moral calculus. Who did I owe my life to? Myself. Finn. The radio-silent thousands we might never meet but who still whisper into the static. The choice landed like a gavel. I keyed the mic and dragged the transmitter's output down to a whisper, then to a dead silence. The frequency went black. The condenser's pumps clicked in sympathetic alarm. I could have stayed. I could have tried to out-talk whatever came. But words are a signal. Signals are a map. I ran. We left a skeleton crew. A decoy beacon looped on a delayed timer, so the repeater would still suggest life on frequency for a while. Plus a few thermal charges wired to the back door. in case the reclaimers made it inside. I locked the heavy hatch and pushed the panel into the scorched slot that would make the bunker look abandoned until a hand was certain. Then I threw a pack over my shoulder, hoisted Finn, and ran into the white teeth of the storm. The heat hit like a forge. The world became a smear of light and noise. I staggered, lungs burning, and Finn slumped heavier with every step. The convoy's beacon had gone from green to steady amber. They were waiting at the fold's mouth, perhaps making a perimeter. I followed the blinking light like a star, and the compass Finn clutched like a rosary. We found them at the lip of the valley, crouched in a shaded cut where the sun folded away like a curtain. It should have been impossible. A pocket of darkness, cool and real, a cliff face that swallowed the day. The air tasted green and old. Trees, real ones, stood like sentries in the hollow. People moved like citizens, not scavengers, faces wet with sweat and relief. Mara was there, dirt on her cheek, eyes like a woman who'd seen too much and still refused to look away. The convoy had turned into a ring of bodies and vehicles, a fragile throat through which we moved. I set Finn down on a slab of cool stone and watched color drain back into his face as the valley's shade did what science hadn't done in years. It gave night a shape for a little while. "It's real," Mara said, as if the syllables needed a witness. "We have a gorge with moving air. The sun dips enough. There's a spring that tastes like memory." Relief hit like a tide and then a new weight. We had survived the crossing, but there were more of us than the valley could hold. The reclaimers' map had not been fooled. They'd been diverted, but not defeated. The fold was real, a salvatory wound in the world, but it was also a prize that would make hunters of men. I looked at the transmitter's small decoy beacon blinking through the heat like a false star. In the valley's soft blue dusk, I understood that the battle wasn't over. We had found a place that might let the sun set for a while, a place that might give us water in a weird night. But to keep it, we'd have to fight not just for space, but for what it means to be human when light doesn't rule the clock anymore. And in the heartbeat between victory and dread, I realized something else. I'd left the signal, but not the story. I had traded the microphone for a chance to touch real water and to save a boy who saw the world in compasses. That felt like both betrayal and salvation. The cliff's shadow was tall and true. The valley breathed like a living thing. The transmitter's delayed loop would buy us hours, perhaps days. But the real test, the real decision, lay in what we did next. Defend the fold, share it, or hide it and let others perish outside its rim. The moral arithmetic bent and cracked under the weight. The turning point had been reached. We had a place worth fighting for, a wound in the world that might heal if we could protect it. The cost would be measured in blood, compromises, and who we decided were we. I sat on the cool stone, Finn sleeping with soft, ragged breaths, and I spoke into the air as if confessing to an old friend. "This is Reed," I said aloud, though no mic was keyed. "We found a valley. We have water. We have shade. We have a choice." The sun refused to set outside the rim, but for the first time in years, twilight had an honest shape. The storm had taken much, but it had also given something so fragile and immense that it felt like a new beginning, if we were willing to keep the light from taking it back. Whatever came next would be loud and dangerous. But sitting there in the valley's mouth, with Finn's hand clutching the compass, Mara's back to the ring, and the convoy making a slow, cautious camp, I let myself breathe the impossible air. I had given up the microphone to find a place where the sun might finally be fooled. That choice cracked something open inside me, and what poured out was not regret so much as a fierce, furious hope. We had reached the turning point. The world would decide how it wanted the next act to go, and for once, it felt like we might get to answer back. After the valley, the world felt different and the same in the same breath. We had traded the hum of the transmitter for the thud of boots on forest floor. We had traded the brittle, artificial safety of the bunker for a shaded hollow that felt, briefly and dangerously, like mercy. The fold was real. The spring ran, thin and stubborn, but it ran. Moss gathered on stones where the sun's glare could not reach. The air was cooler in a way that made me ache with gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in a long time, night had a shape, a soft, brief curtain of dark that the sun bowed to for hours. People slept without the electric hum of fans. Children learned what a shadow meant. But the aftermath was not a tidy redemption arc. It was a messy ledger of wins and debts. The first immediate consequence was obvious. We had something worth killing for. The reclaimers, who'd been diverted by Mara's clever ambuscade, didn't go away. They returned in waves, smarter and more coordinated. They tested our perimeters like dogs at a fence, sniffing, probing, and then attacking where we were weakest. We lost a day's worth of supplies in the second skirmish. A man named Jory, who taught the kids to read using flashcards made of salvaged magazine pages, didn't make it to the next dawn. They took him in the night. We found the signs, a shallow grave, a boot print smudged into soft soil. We also faced the slow problems, biological, chemical, logistical, that never show in a triumphant banner. The spring was fed from an underground seam that had held against the sun's tyranny. Its flow was modest and seasonal even in the old world. We had to ration differently, not by cans but by liters, not by days but by weeks. Crops under shade frames grew, yes, but they were fragile seedlings of progress. Fungi and a few hardy greens thrived in cool shadow, and we learned to coax them with compost from the humanure method Mara swore by. It worked, in the pragmatic, hands-in-dirt way that made me ashamed and grateful at once. I kept thinking about the transmitter, about the line of static I'd left looping like a heart monitor. I had given up the mic to find living water. The consequence of that decision braided with every other consequence. People outside the valley lost a signal they'd relied on. Some had already died because the decoy loop had misled them. Others were still scavenging the dunes, searching for a voice that no longer answered. That knowledge is heavy in your chest like heat. I visit the fold's rim at dusk and think of those out there. We did not save everyone. We saved some. That is both pride and guilt, and the only currency left that measures our choices. What's changed in me surprises me. I had been a recorder of events, someone who gave language to the world's decline. Being at the fold pulled something else into focus. Survival shifted from broadcasting to stewardship. The microphone taught people where danger was. The well taught people how to live. I swapped schedules for irrigation timetables. I traded scripts for seed catalogs, and the voice I'd cultivated for years melted into the quieter, more complicated voice of someone who negotiates water shares and argues about boundaries. My days filled with meetings under shade canopies where we tried to decide whether we teach our methods freely or hide them to protect the valley. We chose, in fits and starts, to teach openly. Not everyone agreed. Trust is an organ you only get to exercise so many times before it forgets how to open. I learned to read people the way I used to read weather patterns. Mara is a leader by habit, practical, unromantic, the sort who measures the cost of a life in canned food and roots. Finn, with his still stiff shoulder, became our runner and a teacher of small things. How to triangulate a weak beacon, how to sterilize a wound with the minimum of water. The boy healed and changed, like everything does here, into someone who carries both fear and a stubborn tenderness. Watching him sleep untroubled for the first time since the crossing was as close to joy as I would let myself be. Nature in the fold is healing in the narrow, limited way that a patch grafted onto a scar might. The shade stone keeps saplings alive. Insects, those tiny bright things that died early across the plains, have begun to show up again in numbers that are laughably small and infinitely significant. I watched a butterfly cling to a leaf the way a person clings to a word. Pollination is still a question, but pockets of reproduction exist now where none did before. It's not a reversal of the world. It's a local gentle persistence. The rest of the landscape beyond the valley remains the same relentless mirror of ruin. Barren, hot, dusted with the pale ash of dead towns. Community forms quickly when survival demands it, and more slowly when souls need rebuilding. We put guards on shifts, built a small solar grid shielded under rock overhangs, and set up a simple water purification loop that used charcoal and sand in sequence. We tried to be fair with water shares, and fairness is always a negotiation. Some weeks, fairness is a table. Other weeks, it is a battleground. Mara runs trade convoys that bring in seeds and salvaged parts in exchange for lessons on conserving water, or for the medical patch that Finn learned to stitch. Each convoy is a thread drawn taut. Pull too hard in one direction and the web snaps. Reflection is a noisy room. There are nights I sit at the valley's lip and replay the old broadcasts in my head like reels. Sometimes I can still hear my own voice coming from a different life, steady, measured, insisting on facts when what people craved were stories. In the fold, stories are useful currency. We barter them for courage. I tell the children about cities that used to light up the sky like a smear of stars, and they listen as if listening was a skill they had to be taught. I tell them not to romanticize the old world. I tell them that it failed in part because it stopped listening to small signals, moss, soil microbes, a single failed stream, and thought itself invincible. They ask blunt questions. They want to know if night will come back forever. I tell them the truth. I don't know. But I tell them we can plant, protect, and build. The moral weight of leadership sits on me sometimes like a physical thing. There are nights I wake thinking about the people who followed me, wondering whether my decision to leave the transmitter had been arrogant or necessary. I hear voices in the static sometimes, ghosts of those who used to call in. A woman who said, still here, listening. I wonder where she is now. Did she find shade, or is the static all that remains? We tried to reconnect with others beyond the ridge. Mara and I organized short-range relays with low-power bursts at scheduled intervals. We alternated, some nights broadcasting news of the valley, other nights listening for cries for help. We found a few survivors. A family clinging to a collapsed theater 20 miles east, an old weather tech who'd been living off preserved manuscripts and the memory of models. Each person came with their own story and their own ledger of loss. We tried to be a net, not a lighthouse. There are victories, small and fierce. We harvested a patch of beans that did better than expected. Finn taught a teenager to solder a diode that kept the refrigeration box at a sensible chill for storing medical supplies. Mara brokered a temporary truce with a nearby enclave by trading knowledge for an armored cart. The reclaimers were not fully beaten, but they had been contained enough that a child could fetch water at dusk without being shot at in the street. This kind of arithmetic felt like a miracle, and the world kept being itself. Capricious, indifferent, and at times unbearably cruel. Winters, if you can call them that, were recorded as short-lived dips that gave us brief breath. The sun still sat stubbornly high most days. The fold's relief was a patch, not a cure. The broader climate feedback loops continued to gnaw at what remained. We lost a planting season because a chemical fog rolled in from a burned industrial cache miles away, killing seedlings overnight. We buried 10 rows of sprouting hope and swore a small oath to be smarter next year. On the personal level, what changed most in me is less dramatic, less visible, and more like a shift in a compass needle. I had been a witness. Now I am a steward. Where I once measured facts and broadcast them, I now measure lives and weigh them. Where I once tried to be objective, detached, and clear, I now carry the messy bias of someone who chooses people over ratings. The radio taught me how to call across emptiness. The valley taught me how to answer when someone called back. The aftermath is a long, thin road. The sun still refuses to set outside our hollow rim, but inside that rim we have slices of dusk that taste like old promises. We are rebuilding in the sense that we are planting, organizing, defending, and arguing. We are improvising institutions in the form of guard rotations and seed banks. We are imperfect, and we are alive. That is the honest summation. If you listen to the frequency now, perhaps someone does. What you'll get is not a clean sermon, but a human log. A band of people who found a tiny wound in the world and chose, with all the compromises that decision requires to keep it from closing. We did not save the planet. We did not stop the sun. We saved a fragment of it, and in that fragment lives a complicated, stubborn hope. I don't know if the fold will be a seed for something much larger or merely a temporary shelter for a handful of survivors. I don't know whether Finn will grow old enough to see stars again. I don't know whether my voice will ever return to the airwaves with the same authority. What I do know is this: the choice to leave the transmitter and carry a boy through the white teeth of a storm was the right one for me. It cost me my role as the constant voice on a static dial, but it gave me dirt under my nails, a community to name, and a well that still sings. The world did not reset. It did not heal in one sweeping gesture, but a place that can make shadow again and keep water flowing matters more than the neatness of a broadcast. We keep the ledger of those we've lost and whisper them into the night of our valley so they do not vanish entirely. We plant, we fight, we teach, and sometimes, we sleep through the dusk hearing nothing but the slow, ordinary breathing of people learning to live again. There is no final act here, only the next dawn, I mean the next dusk, and the small work of keeping the light from taking back what we have found. I've been watching the horizon again. It's not much of a horizon anymore, more a pale scar, where the world folds under the weight of its own exhaustion. But tonight, I swear I see movement. Not people, not machines, just air shifting. Heat bending in a way that almost feels like a sigh. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's the planet remembering how to breathe again. It's been months since the crossing, weeks since the last raid, days since we found another trickle of water in the rocks above the fold. We've been building something small here, not a city, not a colony, just a heartbeat. Gardens under shade, children learning the names of plants that barely exist anymore, the hum of the pump, the rasp of laughter, rare and unsteady but real. I still climb the ridge sometimes, alone. I carry the old transmitter, though its range barely reaches the next ridge. I patch it into a small battery I keep wrapped in cloth, turn the dial, and let the static run. There's no guarantee anyone hears, but it's not about who's listening. It's about remembering how to speak. I talk about the weather, though weather doesn't mean what it used to. I talk about soil tests and fungi growth and the insects that have started to return. I talk about the boy who now helps me build shade frames, his hands steady and sure. I talk about Mara, who's finally starting to believe that leadership isn't just survival, it's memory too. Mostly, I talk about hope. Not the bright kind, not the kind that promises redemption or restoration, but the fragile, flickering kind. The one that burns low and steady, like a pilot light in an empty house. The one that says, you're still here and that matters. The world outside the fold hasn't healed. It may never heal, not in the way we imagine healing. The great deserts still crawl across continents. The oceans still steam. The sky still hangs heavy with the weight of all we burned. But cracks in the pattern are showing, thin seams where moss grows, where rain falls for minutes instead of seconds, where night lingers just long enough for a star to blink through. I think that's all hope really is, not a promise of salvation, but a pause, a breath, enough space to imagine what might come next. I've learned something about endings. They don't arrive with closure or triumph. They slip in quietly, blending into the rhythm of survival until you realize you've crossed into a new story. We didn't rebuild the world. We didn't solve the sun. But we built shade. We found water. We taught children how to plant seeds and how to listen. That's enough to keep the flame. There are still days when despair leans heavy, when the pump stutters or the food runs short or the sky turns white with heat again. When I think about the ones who didn't make it, the ones I left behind, the voices that used to call into the station, asking if help was coming. Sometimes I wonder if my hope dishonors them. But then I hear laughter echo through the valley, see a child tracing her hand in the dirt to draw the outline of a leaf, and I realize remembrance is the only way to honor the dead. You keep living, you keep building, you keep trying. The radio hums beside me now. The old frequency, cracked and faint. I've patched together what's left of the antenna. It won't reach far, maybe a few miles at best. But I'll say what I've always said, what I'll keep saying until the circuits melt. You're not alone, not yet. There's still air to breathe, still ground to stand on, still hands to hold if you reach far enough. If anyone's out there, if anyone's tuning through the static, know this. The world is quieter now, but quiet isn't the same as empty. There's still something moving beneath the silence. Maybe it's life, maybe it's us. I used to think survival was about enduring, holding on until the world gave us a reason to let go. But I think now, survival is about creating small reasons to stay, planting seeds you may never see sprout, fixing a machine you might never use, teaching a word to a child who might outlive you. The sun hasn't set, maybe it never will, but in the fold, in this fragile cradle of shade and dust, we've learned how to live inside its gaze. We've learned how to carve night from daylight, how to find comfort in the in-between. So this is my final broadcast for the night, maybe for the season, maybe for this life. If you're out there, keep moving, keep building shade, keep your water hidden and your faith visible. And if you ever find yourself at the edge of something, a ridge, a ruin, a decision, remember this. The world didn't end all at once. It ended in pieces, and it will heal the same way, piece by fragile piece. We are one of those pieces, and for now we're still here.